Hello, my name is Alex Pompetzki, and today I'm going to give my Ben talk on fundamental signals, earnings, and stock returns. And so this is a topic that I'm actually covering for my JWS senior thesis. So it's something that I'm interested in, given my background studying finance and statistics. Um, and so I'll start off by taking us through the roadmap of what we're going to cover today. So first, I'm going to go through what my research question is, then talk about some of the prior literature in the field, and then my contributions in extending the current body of research. Then I'm going to talk about the data I'm going to use, where I'm going to get that data, and the methodology for constructing some of these variables. Um, and then I'm going to talk about my predictions, and hypotheses on how, some of my conclusions might be different from the previous ones found in the field. So first, my research question. Um, how do changes in fundamental signals affect future earnings and stock returns? So just by way of terminology, fundamental signals is information from the financial statements. So examples are changes in inventory, changes in receivables, etc. And so those are going to be the input or predictor variables in my analysis. So in terms of previous research, there's been a lot of studies done in this field. Three of the main ones that I'm going to be using uh, kind of using a similar methodology as them is Levin Theogarjan in 1993. So they constructed empirical proxies of accounting information, that's the fundamental signals, and showed significant relationships between changes in signals and contemporaneous stock returns. Um, Aberbanel and Boucher in 1997 studied the relationship between fundamental signals and future earnings. And then again, the same research team the following year constructed a portfolio based on their fundamental analysis previously, and were able to earn 13.2% annualized abnormal returns. Um, so in terms of extending the body of research, I plan to pursue a methodology similar to Aberbanel and Boucher in their two papers, but update with more recent data. Their papers, identified important relationships between fundamental signals and future earnings, and also stock returns. And the reason this is important to kind of update the information is that in the 20 years since they've been done, these papers have between them been cited over 1,000 times. So they're highly cited papers in the field, but the data is most likely out of date since they're using data from 1983 to 1990. So there are reasons why the relationships they identified might have changed, in the subsequent 20 years. For example, changes in the macroeconomic environment. For example, the recession of 2008. The rise of tech, industries. So the actual industry composition of our economy is different than it was in, the 80s and 90s, or mostly 80s, is where they're getting their data from. So in particular, the rise of tech industries may emphasize different accounting metrics, and so different, fundamental signals could have, different, relationship between stock returns. Um, and also, investors may have exploited the abnormal returns found from their strategy, constructing similar, strategies as they did in their 1998 paper. So in terms of the data that I'm going to use, primarily I'm going to use words data, and that contains detailed accounting information. And so from that database, it's going to be relatively straightforward to construct the fundamental signals, which I'll go into detail. I've had to do that on the following slide. And also, they have earnings data within words. And then CRISP has historical stock price data for looking at stock price. So the methodology that I'm going to use is to construct fundamental signals based on accounting information, and those are the predictor variables in my regression analysis. Then construct dependent variables, so that 1-year ahead earnings, long-term earnings, and cumulative abnormal returns. Then fit a regression to categorize the relationship between the fundamental signals and the earnings variables, future earnings. And then I'm going to interpret this relationship and see how whether or not some of the relationship is similar to what was found by previous researchers. So in terms of actually constructing the fundamental signals, this is taken from Aberbanel and Boucher, and I'm going to be using the same construction. So you can see on the slide here the details of how each variable is constructed, but it's got things like inventory, receivables, capex, and it's important to note that these are changes in everything is a year-over-year change in inventory and receivables, for example, and then it's standardized based on the change in sales. Then there's a identifier for earnings quality, which is based on what inventory system the firm uses, and also the auditor opinion. So, in terms of the dependent variables, we talked about this before, but 1-year ahead earnings, long-term growth in earnings, and then cumulative abnormal returns. So these dependent variables get a sense of kind of cover both short-term and long-term, and both accounting and versus market returns. So really get a good sense. It covers a broad range of possible impacts of the fundamental signals. So then my predictions and hypotheses while I'm doing my thesis analysis. So the importance of certain fundamental signals may have changed over time due to changes in the macro economic environment and the change in the industry composition of firms in our economy. In particular, high-tech firms have different working capital requirements than brick-and-mortar firms in general. So that could change the impact of our receivables and inventory. Software firms, in particular, have shortened operating cycles, less working capital, and inventory requirements than traditional, manufacturing or retail firms. So, also, I plan on including additional fundamental signals which may be important, which were missed in previous analysis, such as leverage. There's nothing in the previous fundamental signals to include leverage other than working capital. So I also believe that the financial crisis and the credit crunch might affect debt, which is why I think it's important to include leverage. And then I think it also would probably change the relationship they identified with receivables, and just how analysts perceive changes in receivables has likely changed because we're in a different credit environment than we were in the 80s. So these are some of the references, the 3 main papers that I'm referencing. The more directly, the first 2 is what I'm planning on updating. And so that's my senior thesis. And thank you for taking the time to listen.